You are live. Hey, it's MacAdmin Monthly for June
Hello.
13th. Are we saying that's an unlucky date? Or is that only if it's on a Friday? I'm not sure. But anyway, we're just going to dive right in. What we're talking about today are our favorite announcements from WDC, which happened last week. For anyone who might be uninitiated on this front, that's Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference. Happens once a year. It is really where Apple lays out their roadmap. And I think we didn't plan this. This is just going to be an open conversation. But I think there's so much to talk about. I think we're going to have to time box this and put some brakes on at the end because there's so much to talk about. And I think the most interesting thing to me is that, we think in terms of announcements at WDC, but this year, there were some good Mac announcements, but for Mac admins, there weren't really big pronouncements. You kind of had to go digging for them. So I think all of the announcements came kind of in some sessions later during the week and really in documentation, and you had to kind of go dig in. And then this is just the right crew who likes digging into that stuff. So I grabbed Rich Troughton and Matthew Warren. Thank you so much for joining me. I know you two are both fabulous community helpers and love digging into this stuff. So I really wanted to kind of pick your brains about some of the favorite things that grabbed you from WDC last week. Matthew, why not just start out?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. I think you're right. There was a lot of things that were interesting for developers during the keynote, but what was really interesting kind of came later and weren't necessarily like banner or marquee announcements, but were rather, to me, it was a signal that Apple has been listening to some of the needs of the administrative community and are adding a lot of the controls and feature sets to better manage organizationally owned devices. So kind of the long-running complaints that many administrators have had about not being able to do particular things or not being able to have the guardrails around software update that we might like. It's nice to see Apple kind of acknowledge that, maybe if the action hasn't been there as quickly as we might like, they have been listening. So it'll be really interesting to see how things like declarative device management around software update shake out with the vendors. And hopefully we'll be able to see a lot of improvement in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, the declarative device management stuff is super interesting, and I think there are a lot of great uses for it. I'm still just in awe of Nudge. So until Nudge stops working, I think that's going to be my method of getting people to update. I'm a big sort of like dashboard person, and I try to be as data driven as possible, and I collect tons of data, and that's my favorite graph. Like when Apple drops an update and you set Nudge to go update people, just watching this sort of like the axes cross of people updating and the old version sort of dropping away over time. So yeah, Rich, how about you? I know you're our resident. You're going to document all this, right? So give us the preview.
I mean, I'm going to try. I would say that this is the year where for declarative device management, where Apple's talked. They introduced it a couple of years ago. They talked about it a bit last year. They're like, this is good stuff. You should be adopting it. This is a year where Apple has started saying, look, MDM is going to be DDM going forward. This is where we're going to be putting our attention. This is where we're going to be putting our focus. Here's where you're going to see benefits from it. It's no longer just, you get faster inventory. Well, big deal. Now we're seeing with software update, here's where we're taking that ability to push that logic down to the endpoint, and we're making it truly useful. No longer do you have this like the previous MDM commands, which were not the most reliable and depended on essentially, the Mac picking it up. With DDM, this is going to be something that can be pushed down to the endpoint. It can, at that point, the endpoint can figure out its own logic, and it's much closer to the user and you're going to see much better, I think, reliability and functionality coming out of that. So I think this is where Apple's like, look, this is where DDM is going to start strutting. And, I think that is one of Apple's, kind of understated messages. You had to be watching, the device management and what's new in managing Apple devices sessions to get that message. But I think that's the message that Apple was trying to deliver. And in a similar way, Apple was doing the same thing for managed Apple IDs, where, previously it had been like, well, you can use them for BYOD, setup on iOS devices, and you can use them for Appleseed IT, but people weren't really getting this, why do I need this? Why is this important? But now Apple's talking about you can do device-based enrollment with them. So now instead of download a profile and enroll that way, though that still works, Apple's now saying, get a managed Apple ID, tell your folks to go here, sign in, and that is handling. If you can't use ADE for whatever reason, hopefully you can use ADE. But if you can't, here's a way that you can have that better experience for your user with like user-initiated enrollment. So I think those were two big things that came out of it.
Yeah, sorry. I think me coming off mute caused a little echo. But yes, I totally agree with you. There was a ton of stuff that if you took them on their own, it's like, oh, that's a nice little improvement. Oh, well, that's good. But once you start tying everything together, you're like, oh, I see how this works.
Yeah.
And I think this is also, to me, this is something that in the tech industry we're supposed to love, right? Like, I have to learn everything again, right? Like that like, the world of tech is always just about learning and kind of relearning and things changing. So I know I can speak for myself. Like there's a ton I feel like, oh man, I have to kind of get back on top of this because I've lost track of a few things. But the ones that immediately jumped out to me that were just like, I want to shout it from the rooftops. I think attestation coming to the Mac. That's fantastic. We've been waiting for that. It showed up on iOS, and I had, people, other security people always be like, why don't you just use this? I'm like, oh, it's iOS only. Don't tell me that, right? But now we're going to have managed attestation on the Mac. Fantastic. And I love the two features coming to sort of like deployment and setup, which is file vault out of the gate, right? No bits are going on disk until this thing's encrypted. So you can force that up front. Wonderful. And the other piece of that I think is fantastic is sort of like at enrollment, you can say, hey, this device should be on version, or at least on version whatever. I had a bunch of machines that we deployed recently. They're M1s and the whole thing, and they shipped with something like 12.3 or 12.6. And I'm like, in one day, like a bunch of Mac OS 12 machines show up in my fleet. I'm like, what the heck is going on? Oh, so like, to me, like they should just never get out in that state. When we're in a world of Mac OS 13.4, like the end user should never get to use a machine that's on Mac OS 12, start out of the gate. So like those three things, just quality of life, like just rose dramatically. I think that's fantastic.
And not just for us as administrators, that's a quality of life improvement for the users. So they don't have the experience of, hey, your IT department just gave you this computer, you set it up, there's your lovely desktop, and now you have a chore to go perform and do a software update. So kind of getting it out of the gate, like you said, there is a huge improvement for our end users during that setup or provisioning process.
Yeah, I mean, that whole thing, like I think that's something I work really hard at, which is to like, no one should get to the desktop with a machine that's not in a good state, because then we're just sending them to help desk, or we're asking them to like, could you reinstall, or can you do this thing, or this endpoint agent didn't get installed correctly the first time. We go do this. Like, no, it didn't get set up correctly. You should have some automated way of like, hey, check this. It's not, go do it again.
Yeah, but I think that software update as part of Setup Assistant first showed up for the Mac Studio, and I was like, I want that for everything. I want that for every single Mac that's out there. And for us, we have compliance standards where you need to be running the shipping OS within a certain amount of time. And like you said, if it ships with the previous OS, now you're starting out of the gate as a new user with a machine that's not in compliance, and you're experiencing all sorts of I can't get into this, I can't get into that. You put in a ticket with the help desk, and the first thing the help desk says is, "Why are you running this?" Well, you shipped it to me like this. So I think this is going to be a huge win, not just for user experience, but also for security. But honestly, just for that new out-of-the-box experience, it's going to be so nice for people onboarding into a new organization to not have to deal with that.
Yeah, and that helps so many things. Us be a little bit more confident in drop shipping machines directly to people. For like, I know some orgs are up to that, some aren't quite, some are still doing a weird hybrid thing. But yes, all those things make me more confident just shipping a stock machine to someone that's in Apple Business Manager, and they open it up, and I can feel better that everything is going to happen correctly.
Yes. Because, I mean, if setting up that experience where everything works correctly it's just so much better overall, because it's not just good user experience, it's less work for your help desk, who can now focus on more important things, and it's less work for you as the administrator, because now you have that time to not put out that fire. You can go focus on something more important.
Exactly. So any favorites from you, Rich?
Favorites in terms of like what the announcements were?
Yeah, on the Mac, like as a Mac admin, like what's gonna, like when Sonoma ships, what's the first thing you're gonna go implement because you love it so much?
Honestly, the thing I'm loving it about it the most right now is that it seems to be Snownoma. They seem to be really working on fixing stuff instead of putting in a bunch of new features. There isn't a whole bunch of surprises popping up that you're like, what is this? That have happened during previous beta cycles. This just appears to be, at least as a beta 1. We'll see what happens in beta 2. This could all be wrong as a beta 2. But right now, I'm seeing a smooth runway. And I love that. That's the thing I love the most.
Hey, Rich.
Yeah, agreed. The beta is incredibly stable, and people that I work with now joke around with me because I said I installed the beta by mistake, and they're like, "Oh, by mistake," and I was like, "Well, I kind of did because I downloaded it, and I didn't think it was gonna install. I was gonna wait till like later in the day, but I did download, and it was just taking so long, and I think like I got up to get some lunch like later in the day or something, and I came back, and it was like at the login window. I was like, "Oh no, I didn't mean to do this now." So like you said, I was super lucky that like I logged in and like everything worked. Like my external webcam still worked. I hopped on a meeting, like just super cool.
You got to use the cool new rain effect in that meeting with the built-in filters for the camera. Have you done that yet?
I haven't done that.
Do they work?
Great. Yeah, they work. They work great, at least within Zoom and I think Google Hangouts.
I didn't notice that. Someone, I'm not on my Sonoma machine right now, but someone, like as I mentioned, I updated, and they had watched the keynote, and they're like, "Oh, do this," and I'm like, "It doesn't work. I tried it. Huh? All right, I'll have to try again." But that's.
I'm on Sonoma right now. I did this purposefully. I know it's not working with StreamYard, but
that's it's kind of the least important thing to me, but it is a super cool effect as you have Zoom and Meet doing all these other like little reactions, and these are just like, boom, we're going to take our screen over. It's not just a little emoji floating across the screen.
I will admit I cheat a bit. I have 2 daily drivers, and one of them is running Sonoma and the other one is not, because I'm like, if something just this way I get the experience of Sonoma, but if everything just completely goes sideways, I still have a machine that works.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, look, we're all in IT/ops. Like, start your collection, right? Like, you should have just a stack of machines sitting around that are in constant. One's in beta, and one's the one that you use to erase and install and test deployment, and one's your actual machine, and one, you need a whole host of machines. Particularly now, right? Like, we don't really have a great way to test via VMs.
No, unfortunately, and that did not change at WWDC. That is every time I ask about that, they're like, file feedback.
Yeah. But the experience of testing on a real machine has gotten a lot better as well. It's just that you need this physical hardware.
I don't know what I'd do without erase all contents and settings. Well, I do know what I would do, and it takes so much more time.
Yes.
But do you think it will come back? Like, I remember being at WWDC in person when the IT track was still there, and it's like, oh, they use VMware Fusion, and then it's like, since then, of course, VM was a thing because Apple did it on stage. But nowadays, I think it's more like, they want to sell boxes, right? So why should they just bring this serial number and automated device enrollment? Why should they bring it back? Of course, for us, it would be nice, but
I don't know how many more machines they're selling because of that, right? Like, you can still virtualize Mac OS, and you can still virtualize Linux, so I'm not sure that's driving up sales. So I'm hoping that's just a bump in the road as they're transitioning to their virtualization framework. Like, as we know, like all the things that we pointed out that we're so excited about right? So what virtualization framework is 2 releases old?
Yeah.
Something
like that. Yeah.
So
but I have the impression they build it mostly for, the developers that are running Docker and, having this other file system, and the improvements that were needed for the platform for the majority of all the developers. And so, but doing the extra work for the stuff that we, from the administrative perspective, need, I don't know if this is of big importance. And maybe they, like in the past, they had some external people helping them. I don't know. But so it really feels like there's not much going on, but that may change.
Yeah, it's got to be an issue of prioritization. Like you said, it's just a small group. We're mighty, but we are a small group of people who want to test the ADE flow. Whereas you've got folks running like CI/CD pipelines that have much more use for virtualization. So I think that it's just that's where they put the resources, not behind serial spoofing for us.
Yeah, and I will say for the most part, I've had better experiences with Apple's virtualization solution with regards to MDM management than I did with VMware. Like, I would sometimes just have problems, especially like I'd enroll a machine using VMware Fusion, and sometimes profiles would appear, sometimes they would not. They would just, there'd be some weird networking thing that it just wasn't, it didn't work as well as I wanted it to. And I haven't had those issues with VMs that are ultimately hosted by the virtualization framework. I mean, every time I enroll, now it's using user-initiated enrollment through Jamf Pro in my case, but it always works, where sometimes it just wouldn't with other virtualization solutions. So I don't know.
And I also think, don't forget how desperately Apple wants third parties out of the kernel. So that's another good reason for them to supply virtualization framework. It's almost, it's almost like web browsers on iOS. It's like, same engine, you can provide all these other features around it and do your thing, but it's all WebKit. So it's all virtualization framework, but you can build all these cool things on top of it, and add your own snapshotting or whatever's important.
What's killing me is something that actually takes me back to the original iPhone. No copy paste. Like you can't copy and paste from outside into the VM. I'm having to like do like usually what I'll do is I'll flip on SSH and then use SFTP to move things back and forth. I've heard of other people like turning on ARD inside the VM and then they use screen sharing to do the copying and back and forth.
Is that a limitation of virtualization framework, or is that just a
particular... It is right now, because they said that's one of the things they're planning on fixing, is bringing in that that drag and drop between the VM and the outside world. But I'm just like, right now, it's that one little thing. I'm like, because I'm so used to that from VMware where I can just drag it straight in and drag out.
Yeah, even without that, I feel like copy paste, standard sort of copy paste would be nice.
Yeah,
but I think mounting a shared folder is possible. I don't use this, but
Tart allows you to mount a shared folder, which makes things a lot easier. Then you can have like a shared text document that you copy and paste between hosts.
Well, I think a lot of the things we've touched on, I think actually all the things we touched on are dependent on MDM. And we happen to have two other people here who are really involved in the MDM world. So I don't know, I'll throw the question out around MDM. Like, Apple announces all this stuff. How difficult is this to implement? Is it easy? Is it, oh man, this is going to take a lot of work and most MDMs won't be ready by Sonoma release? Or
I mean, it's really hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard to do it in a way that is straightforward and makes sense and doesn't break the old. I mean, speaking just for me, I feel like Kanji's in a really great space with the way we have things organized to take advantage, to continue taking advantage of declarative. But yeah, it's all my friends in the MDM space have wisely left lots of time after WWDC to plan and to execute on whatever Apple announced.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
I think with Central MDM, it's just like it's at a different stage. So we don't have a wide user base out there, so we can just experiment more easily and blend just the traditional MDM and the scheduling and the new declarative more easily. So there's a lot of things that have been integrated and we're testing right now, and it's amazing to see how much info now you get from the devices and user channel and device channel and how this kicks in. And I think the first time we presented it a couple of years ago at MacAdmin, we presented that all the events of enrollment are visible in the data store. So you really can see it from the initial requests, and that really helps to understand. So this is what is still working, and we improved a lot in the last few days.
Well, that's exciting to hear, because I know it's a lot of work, and it's, like we've been saying, this was just announced just last week. So pretty amazing. And of course, there's the non-Mac announcements. I don't know, does anyone here manage iOS? Yeah, well, MDM vendors, I fortunately don't. So I'm kind of happy about that.
At my company, we have two separate teams, because we have one is managing macOS endpoints, the other one's managing like iOS, iPadOS, the Apple TVs. And we realized we really needed to make that split because there's enough details that are different between the two that you really do need to have, for a large organization, you really should have that kind of like specific expertise looking at how to manage it. And it's one of those things that we in my shop's case, we do a lot of iOS development. So we publish a lot of our own apps, which means that, we need to figure out how to get those out to our managed endpoints. We need to figure out, a whole bunch of stuff. We do a lot with certificates. So This is where like some of the details in between, like this profile payload is supported on iOS but not on macOS, starts to really matter. Where you just have different needs, and Apple is supporting them sometimes in very different ways. It doesn't look like it, but they do.
One cool improvement there is the new way that they are going to be bundling Xcode without the iOS simulators wrapped in. That's really nice to see that it's 2.5 gigs instead of 15 or 13.46 or whatever. That's another quality of life improvement that helps the users, helps the administrators, touches. Yeah, I see Eric's very happy about that.
My shop is probably one of the very few using VPP for macOS. And that's going to help us out quite a bit, because it used to be you'd hit the button to install Xcode and then you'd wait. And there's very little feedback to tell you what's going on. And for most apps in the App Store, that's not a big deal. It's like, it's maybe 50 megs, maybe it's 100 megs, maybe it's 200. For most folks with a broadband internet connection, it doesn't seem to take that much time at all. But if you're talking something like Xcode, that's start the process, go get some lunch, come back, go do something else. Maybe it'll be finished then.
But it's mostly the uncompressing. I can download it really fast.
Right.
My Mac takes forever uncompressing. So no, I do like to see this. I presume the newer versions will let you grab some of that stuff a little bit more automatically through Xcode, because I'm sure a bunch of us remember sort of way back in the day, Xcode was shipped as Xcode, and then you could go to the developer site and get all these extras, Quartz Composer, and like all these other things that just weren't bundled in. Like there was a period of time where this wasn't bundled into Xcode. You had to go separately download the things that you wanted. So it reminds me a little of that, but of course it would be nice if on demand, like, oh, you need this SDK? Great, I'll go grab it for you. Is that the case?
I haven't looked into it that deeply. I mean, the main thing I noticed was that their announcement that it was going to be much smaller now from the App Store, and I was like, yes, because I mean, for us, that's one of the things that, like I said, we use VPP. So for Xcode, we just tell folks go into our self-service portal and hit the button to install, and sometimes they're like, okay, I've hit the button, nothing happened. And we have to tell them, okay, let's go look in var log install.log. Okay, it's going.
Right. When we were talking about management of iOS, Emily in chat mentioned disappointed that some basic management of watchOS isn't coming for Bring Your Own, which would help with recognizing an Apple Watch as a managed location for some data. Yeah, that's something I don't even think about at all. I can't imagine managing watchOS. Like, to me, that seems out of bounds, but I guess I guess it's useful.
See, for my shop, I can totally see us doing that, because we do a lot with like, working with, trying to think how best to say it. It's something where it's easy for our customers to be able to get that information from an Apple Watch. Maybe the app itself is, a cloud hosted thing, and it's still feeding through your iPhone, but being able to look up information quickly, important information quickly on your watch has been, for us, a big selling point. But along with that has come, well, now we need to secure that information. We need to secure that data. We need to make sure that this is being handled properly.
Well, Emily gave some good examples after I mentioned that. So Siri can't read a managed calendar for an agenda, for example, and Outlook complications won't load on a watch if Outlook was installed via management on a BYO device. Like, okay, I could see some of that. I guess once you allow it on the phone, though, to me, it just seems like, yeah, I guess.
The security ratchet only goes one way. So as soon as some shops hear that we'll be able to manage watchOS, they'll be like, and you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd be really interested to hear which shops are actually wishing to manage Apple Watches at scale and what kind of use cases are, because I'm sure it's just a failure of imagination on my part, but it seems like that's a very, very, very specified thing. So to me, a lot of times that means that there's some really cool stuff going on and I want to hear about it.
I don't know. It's one of those things where I know that for example, the U.S. Army was very big into iOS in particular. So I could very well see them saying, "Yeah, let's get into this. Let's dig into this and manage watchOS."
Yeah, I'm thinking like maybe putting pass keys, or not pass keys, but like wallet items available for scanning some sort of access card or something on an Apple Watch. That might be an interesting use case. I don't know.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
I still have this feeling of like, I'm not a watch person in general, but it's just like my phone. I have my own phone. I don't put any MDM stuff on it. I don't put any corporate stuff on it, right? Like, I just keep them separate. And same thing with the watch. I don't know how many companies are buying their employees' watches. If the company's buying them, sure. If it's my watch that I'm bringing, like, no. But I mean, I guess I can see that. Like, I don't know. I guess it's just my own line that I draw. Like, I wouldn't pair my watch with a company-owned phone.
Right.
I don't know. It's sort of like, when I run into people trying to install Steam on their corporate machine or, something like that. It's like, you get a paycheck, go buy a gaming device. Like, sorry.
It's interesting listening to Horace Deju talk about Apple Watch and how, he wears two watches because he's interested in new gadgets and, trying things out. So, yeah, I could see a future where you've got your personal watch and the corporate watch on the other arm.
I can see that for some people. I can't see it for me. Like, I love technology, but I don't need to wear two watches. Unless, I'm trying to catch up to my steps goal, and then I'll just double my steps, right? No, that's the first thing I would turn off on a watch is like, don't tell me. Like, I know I'm active. You don't need to tell me to sit and stand and breathe and run, whatever.
That leads over into the Vision OS stuff. I think that Apple's kind of signaling, hey, we're both listening to what you need as a corporate entity, but also we're pushing towards these are personal computing devices, and a watch is just a peripheral. A Vision OS a Vision Pro is a peripheral that you're accessing data on, and it may be that the thinking is more towards management controls for the devices that are accessing that data, rather than thinking about what's the specific use case for a particular device. I don't know.
Yeah, I really kind of missed sort of some of the details on the Vision Pro in terms of, like, is it its own standalone computer, or does it rely on a host device? Do you need a Mac to use Vision OS or some host device, or can you use it completely standalone?
What I was getting from the demo, which may not be the whole story, is that it is a standalone device, and I have an Oculus Quest, and It is a standalone device for the most part. I had to use, my phone to do the initial setup, but after that, it was pretty much everything runs from the Quest, and I was actually a little disappointed to see the battery pack cable coming out the back, because I'm used to on my Quest, I don't have that. I just have this thing on my face that, probably makes me look real dumb. But
it's heavy, probably, right?
Yeah, and that's actually the thing that I think that people are going to be, once they start to get their hands on the Vision Pro, they're going to be a little surprised as to the weight, because it's going to be, if it winds up being like my Oculus Quest, it is a few pounds on a part of your body that is not used to holding up a few extra pounds. So, yeah. It's going to be interesting, but I think where it's going to take off is where Apple makes that lighter. Once they turn it from a giant pair of ski goggles into a much slimmer pair of ski goggles.
I mean, I think we'll see. I think there's this initial wave, and there were people, press and other people out at Apple Park during WDC, and they got to try it. And pretty universally, people said it was incredibly comfortable. Now, they didn't use it for hours on end. But I also imagine that given the naming, Vision Pro, if it follows sort of everything else that Apple does, we will eventually see a Vision Lite or Vision Air.
Vision Air.
Right. Something that's like, okay, it's going to be less expensive, slightly less capable than the Pro model or whatever. So we'll see if that's the case. And hopefully that's maybe a little bit lighter. But yeah, you got to power the thing somehow, right?
Yeah. Honestly, though, the Vision Pro does solve one of the things that has made me extremely hesitant to get VR for, like, I have kids, and they're like, Dad, I want one. I'm like, I'm not getting you one. And the reason I'm not getting you, well, there's a few reasons why I'm not getting one, but one of them is that you can't see. You just can't see, and they like to do things together, and they're gonna punch each other out. And they're not going to mean to do it. At least for the first punch, they're not going to mean to do it. The second punch might have some meaning behind it. But yeah, I was like, you can't see each other. You can't see yourself. You can't see each other. You can't see anything while you have this thing on. And at least with the Vision Pro, you don't necessarily have that issue where if you're getting close to something, Apple's going to be like, and look, you're approaching a chair, which in the Oculus Quest, that's not an option. There's a bit of like they have you draw like a safety zone around yourself, and you're really not supposed to go beyond that. With the Vision Pro, I think it's going to be a lot more safe to just physically use because you can see. The eye thing, I think right now is going to be a little weird to get used to. When I was looking at it, was a bit uncanny valley, but I'm like, at least you can see. Whereas all you see on the front of my Vision Quest is just this black, solid, opaque plastic thing. And don't get near me while I have it on because I can't see you.
I mean, I think it's fascinating. And, being able to work from home, I was watching this in my den on, regular sort of TV. And they went through the whole keynote and, they come back to Tim Cook and he's like, one more thing. My younger daughter was home and I called her down. I was like, I think this is history in the making, and, we got to the end and maybe it wasn't the same as the iPhone announcement, but I think at some point, 10 years down the line, she'll look back on this and say like, oh yeah, I remember when this was announced, right? Like I remember before everyone had one, or like whatever's going to happen in 10 years. Like, I don't think this is going away. I think it's useful for a certain group of people. Like it's not for me right now. Might be in the future, but I think there are use cases for it right now. I'm really sort of like fascinated by some parallel universe where Google Glass stayed a product because, they had a tiny device. Even V1, V2 was, it was relatively tiny. It just sort of had this little block of glass that you could look into and get information. And if they kept going with that and miniaturizing it and refining it, and I don't know, like I think they were onto something there because it sure looked goofy. And I know every glass holes, whatever, but like when Apple shipped the AirPods initially, everyone was like, man, those look dumb. And before you knew it, you're just like, yep. Like they were just normal, right? They just became a thing. So,
and before the AirPods, it was the white headphones with wires that Apple leaned into with their advertising, right? With the colorful backgrounds and the dancing and the very visible white headphones.
Yes, but if you had Apple branded headphones or not, like you had wires. With the AirPods, like these stems kind of coming out like an inch-ish. And yes, they've gotten on the newer ones they've gotten a little shorter, but the original ones, like, they look kind of odd, but all right, everyone got used to them. So I think the same thing with like Google Glass, like, maybe if the price came down and the capabilities were going up or whatever, like people get used to them. Because right now the Apple Vision Pro I can't see walking down the street with that thing. Like, oh, I need directions. I want, maps or something. Am I using that for AR provided maps and directions? No
Can
way.
you see using it on a plane?
I can.
Well,
I was just about to say that frequent business travelers are going to be big users of this for two reasons. One, they don't have to worry about anyone shoulder surfing them anymore.
Yeah. Well,
because only the only person who's going to see that screen is you. So you don't have to worry about that.
That was the sole example they showed of wearing it in public. And already on a plane, people already wear sleep masks and giant headphones. Yeah. Your job on a plane is blocking out the plane. So like that's already acceptable. So I think that was fine for them to use it as an example. And yes, on a plane, sure. Again, you're going to need that battery pack though, because unless you have a very short flight.
The other thing I thought of right away is I can't wait for the first person who gets arrested for having, they're driving their Tesla on autopilot and they have this thing on. They're freaking going to get arrested. And they're going to be like, what am I getting charged with?
Well, it's good. You can look up those charges immediately in AR and come up with a way to get out of them.
Hey Siri, how much does this cost?
Yeah, exactly.
But it was, it was really interesting to see work as such a target for Apple devices. We hear over and over that Apple's a consumer corporation. Apple's, we're in enterprise and education, and we're trying to manage these consumer devices. So, seeing Apple target the Apple Vision Pro for work was pretty interesting.
I think they're taking a page from the iPhone success story because what the iPhone started off as a consumer device, but Apple very quickly figured out we can take this market from BlackBerry. We can absolutely own it. And that's when you start to see things like MDM. That's when you start to see things like this focus on business. This is when you start to see, serious encryption showing up on devices. This is like back when we have legacy file vault, which is an encrypted disk image. And on the iPhone, they're already talking full on hardware encryption.
Yep.
I think they're looking at that and going, we can absolutely own this market for business VR if we approach this right.
Yes.
Now, is there a market there? I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, I think there is, and I know they made reference to being able to share a device, and more details are coming later. But like, is a company dropping $3,500 on every employee? Oh, I don't know. Just like the at-home use case, am I buying one for each one in my family? No, right? Like you would have to share this thing. I'm not in for, 10 or 12K of Vision Pros for my whole family. Again, I think, again, it's not for me yet, but there are absolutely uses and people will absolutely buy them and all the things. And
I think that's why we'll see, like where it is right now. It's to price out people who would maybe otherwise be on the fence, to really have that kind of first version go out to the folks who are like, oh, this is absolutely for me right now. Let me start playing with it. Rather than just, like having a bunch of people buy them and then the press reviews get bad because, hey, this $500 device isn't all that great. It's a V1 version. Don't buy it. That would hurt them ultimately in their long-term goal.
Yeah. That $3,500 is 100% the early adopter tax.
Yeah. And Rich, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like Apple thinks they can get into business with this. As you mentioned, the comparison to the iPhone, that was the first time I heard them use the E word on stage. Steve Jobs said enterprise when he talked about the iPhone, and we're going to have a VPN. We partnered with Cisco, and like they really started talking about getting into the enterprise with that. I don't know if that's quite come true. Like it's a useful business tool, absolutely, but it didn't become, I don't know. I think the iPhone has the potential, but I think Apple holds it back a little bit. The iPhone has the potential to be like that single sci-fi device where you walk around with it all day, you do a bunch of stuff, you get to a place, you dock it, boom, it's your whole computer, right? Like we keep hearing about, this, the A14 chip and the M1 chip and all these things that the iPhone, like it's so powerful, but there are all these restrictions that Apple, like, oh, well, you can't do that. Why? Because you can't. Because we like our product segmentation, so you buy one of each, right? Like, that's, I think that was the other thing I got from the keynote a lot. I think, like in other years, right? Like they announce these things and everyone's like, oh, that's great. And it's meanwhile, like multiple timers. Yeah. Like you should be embarrassed it took you this long. And, there are certain announcements they make. It's like, well, yeah, this should have been in place years ago. Like, I'm glad you're getting to them, but it's a little embarrassing, right? So
the thing that I really wish Apple would be embarrassed about is the lack of support for WebAuthn in the web browser for like pop-up authentication for different applications or at the login window. That's still not a thing. It's so disappointing. And
Passkeys.
It's such a huge, yeah, I know.
Passkeys is your answer because it'll get rid of all of it.
And I think that's where Apple
that'll probably
really
be. Yeah, I think that would be Apple's answer at this point.
I think and hope so, and I hope that shows up, in whatever the current Safari thing is, WK WebView or whatever that is. Because yes, I've run into a few applications that we can't integrate with 2FA because they use the older WK WebView and they, give you this pop up and like now you can't. You can put in your name and password, but you can't do 2FA.
I think you're right, Rich. The idea is, why add this new implementation when we want you to go to passkeys anyway?
Yeah, and I really want passkeys to succeed because they do solve so many problems.
Sure.
It's an old idea given a new frame. It's public-private key pairs, unique for all your applications, but doing that solves so many problems. And I want to get rid of the pushes to my phone. I want to get rid of the this thing with the numbers that sits on my desk. I want to get rid of all that. I want this to get back to simple again. And I think that passkeys gets us there. I think in 5 years, we're going to be asking ourselves, why did we fool with all this nonsense? But I think that's, I think that would be Apple's answer at this point. And Apple's never been shy about giving their opinions about what you should be doing on the enterprise. But I think that they might implement it, or they might say, you should take this time to do passkey support. And another example kind of that kind of thinking is, I don't know if you guys saw the mention of relays as part of what's new in managing Apple devices. I'm excited about those because this is something that it's a secure proxy where you could, in theory, completely get rid of a VPN. And I love that. I love the idea that, because again, you're getting rid of this whole swath of authentication. You're simplifying things. You're simplifying your stack. You're even you might even be able to get to a place where there are some organizations where you can't have an externally exposed MDM for reasons, not reasons I necessarily agree with, but for reasons, where you could set up a relay and send that MDM traffic over the internet to a relay to relay onto your MDM server, which could then talk back to you. And it's not exposed to the internet, but it acts as though it is. I'm really excited about that. I want to see that happen. I want to see shops adopt relays because I think that'll simplify things so much.
Absolutely.
There you go. That's the answer to the question about what you're so excited about. That was announced last week.
I am kind of excited about relays for that one thing because I've got some colleagues who are like, I can't expose my MDM to the outside.
Yeah.
And they've told me the reasons, and I'm like, those reasons are dumb. But I can't do anything about that. But here's the potential solution for them that'll at least make it so you can do your job. And I love that.
Yeah.
And also, if you consider how, those shops that need to have on-prem components and really run it in their own data center, they have so much things going on in achieving that. And now it gets much simpler because it's supported from the OS. So I also see a lot of potential there. It can get rid of so many extra layers and VMs that are needed just for that, whatever the products are called. But there's big vendors having that in their total management suite and no longer needed.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to ruthless simplification. I want to get rid of, because we've just been like, oh, we have this problem, throw another layer on. Oh, we have this other problem, throw this other layer on. And now you've got this thing where it's like, if I lose my phone, I'm just dead. And I want this to be, like I said, ruthless simplification. I want to get back to where it's simple again, simple to manage, simple to use, and where the user doesn't even have to think about it. Because right now we're asking folks to put up with an enormous amount of overhead in the name of security. And we can get rid of it by adopting some of these new tools.
You can get rid of most of it, but sure.
Yeah. Well, there's always going to be you can get, but like I said, passkeys solves a ton of problems. No more phishing email exercises because you can't fish.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Passkeys passkeys are pretty wonderful, and I remember working with some of the people who put that whole thing together when I was back at Duo Security, and that was just like sort of getting this little glimpse into the future of like, wow, like fundamental changes don't come along all that often, and this is a real fundamental change of how you can have a single strong multiple factor, right? Like it's a multiple factor, but it's a single source, and it can be just as strong as several other multiple factors. So it's a great change. And like, look, we're all over and done with passwords. So it was really nice to see Apple join this partnership and team up with Fido and Google and a bunch of other companies that put this standard together. So that's super exciting.
I really like that deploy passkeys at work session. They did a really nice job of explaining why. If you didn't already, like if your brain wasn't already spinning in that direction, it was really good to get you thinking in that direction. And with the addition of OIDC Federation for managed Apple IDs and the support for passkeys in a managed Apple ID, which was not there, you couldn't do it previously.
Yes.
Those are huge improvements that like I'm itching to turn on as soon as Apple will let us.
Right. I think that was the major gripe when Apple announced passkeys. We're like, do you really have to sync to iCloud Keychain? Well, we can't deploy them if you're doing that. So, they came along and they answered a lot of that basically. So that's really fantastic. And I think your strategy with managed Apple IDs, MAIDs, should be like a slightly separate domain from your main domain. So it should be, maid.example.com or appleid.example.com. But for people who are going to layer them right on top of their domain, I vaguely remember, and someone can please correct me if I'm wrong, I vaguely remember that there's now some way, if people have already registered an Apple ID with @example.com, which is your company, you can claw that back, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. What they'll do is they will tell you that you have, I can't remember if it's 90 days or 60 days
60.
to assign that, change the email address on that existing Apple ID so you don't lose it. And when you change that email address, that's whatever you had associated with it no longer belongs to that company email address. And Chris just is telling me in the chat 60 days and he would know. So one really important thing I would say for folks looking at federation is if you are planning to federate your main domain, have an email subdomain set up so that folks can assign that email address to something else. Because otherwise, if you tell people, well, you need to assign it to another email address, they will, and you might not like the results when that happens.
Right.
But
So
do you care what they change their personal Apple ID to? Do you
Maybe.
know? Do you
It's,
have any visibility of what they choose?
well, you don't have visibility for privacy reasons. As a matter of fact, the only way that you can find out that someone had an Apple ID associated with work ID is if you have some mail rule set up on your mail server to find out who gets that email from Apple, because Apple won't tell you. But for example, I had to, as part of a development team, you got to use your work email address. And now maybe you have a signing certificate associated with that email address. Maybe you have some other important piece of information, like being your agent associated with that Apple ID, that email address. So yeah, you might care. It's not just movies. It might actually be company assets tied to that company email address that you're now reassigning to somewhere else.
yeah.
So my advice would be set up an email subdomain so at least you can make sure that it stays within the bounds of your company.
So we are coming up on an hour, and I always try to cap it at an hour. No one wants to hear us blab on for an hour or more than an hour. So the last WDC related thing I'll mention, I think the biggest surprise that we got out of the week was seeing that Craig Federighi really wails on guitar, man. Did anyone see the clip?
Yeah,
So-
that was not fake. That seemed to be real.
So we saw it in the Apple produced video, and it was very slick, but it was like a close up on hands, and you're like, oh, that's not him. And then he gets up on stage during the week and rocks out, man. So pretty cool. Everyone, I think, is aware we always wrap up and talk about conferences. We got conferences like breathing down our neck. We got Mac DevOps. I think a few people here are attending and or speaking. That's next week, I believe, right? Yeah. And for anyone not attending, I know I just saw in a few different places that Matt, who runs Mac DevOps, just announced a streaming only ticket. So if you were a person who couldn't get there and thought you were going to miss out on the talks, you can join the stream as it's all happening. So I think that was pretty cool addition, pretty cool. And I hope more conferences can kind of do that, because we were talking before the call started, and it's like this frustrating thing that conferences are all sort of coming back in person, and that's great. Just at the same time as most companies are sort of tightening their belts a little bit and saying like, well, I guess you can go choose one, right? So like, you're not going to hit every conference during the year. So if you feel like you're missing out, there are still some ticket options like streaming that can help you with that. And for anyone who's speaking at Mac DevOps, I hope you can incorporate some of this into your talk. I hope it was enough lead time to jump on all these announcements, because there's a lot of good stuff. And then Penn State is, someone remind me when Penn State is. I should know.
That's the end of July. I'm blanking on the exact date, but it's like
end of July. Okay.
Yeah.
18, 19, 20, 21, I think.
Yeah.
Those dates.
And that sounds exciting. Looks like there's a lot of good stuff there. I wish I was making it this year. I know JNUC will have an event, right? Are they doing a thing in person this year?
They are in person. It's going to be moving to Austin, Texas in the fall, in September.
Okay. September, and then October we got Maxis in lovely Göteborg. Can't wait. That's the one that I'm sort of channeling all my energy into attending this year. And I think that kind of
the week after that is Objective by the Sea.
Oh yeah. It's nice that they're not stepping on each other this year.
Tickets are sold out.
Yeah, it goes fast. So yeah, that's super exciting. And then I think that probably rounds out the year, and then we start again. Yeah,
I think so.
Close enough. Well, for anyone who wants to speak at a conference, you still have some options for CFPs or get your courage up for next year. There are a lot of great conferences, and I think looking at this group here, like we a lot of us speak at conferences, but we want to hear from new people. We want to hear from from all the voices. I know I do. Someone please, like someone besides me. You can happily replace me at a conference. That'd be great. And with that, thanks again so much. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Rich, for taking your time to make sure you were here and talk about WDC. It's fantastic.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks.
See you next time.
See everyone.
Bye.